"I'll give you 500K if this junk beats my Bugatti." The words hung in the air like a challenge carved in stone, delivered with the kind of arrogance that only comes from a man who's never lost anything that mattered. Richard Ashford stood in the parking lot of Collins' garage on a Saturday afternoon in late September, the Texas sun beating down on his custom navy blue Bugatti Chiron, a car worth over $3 million, polished to mirror perfection, its W16 engine capable of producing 500 horsepower and reaching speeds most mortals would never experience. Richard wasn't just rich, he was the kind of rich that makes the news, the kind that buys private jets the way regular people buy groceries, the kind that treats money as a scoreboard in a game where he always wins. He'd made his fortune in commercial real estate, flipping luxury properties in Dallas and Houston, building an empire on the backs of people who couldn't afford the homes he sold for millions. And now he stood here, pointing at a rusted 1982 Datsun 280ZX sitting in Sarah Collins's garage, laughing so hard his designer sunglasses nearly fell off his face. The Datsun looked like it had been pulled from a junkyard and forgotten in a field for a decade. Rust covered the fenders like some kind of automotive disease. The paint, what little remained, was faded primer gray with patches of bare metal showing through. One of the pop-up headlights was stuck half open, giving the car a permanent wink that felt almost mocking. The interior was visible through the window. Torn seats, a cracked dashboard, a steering wheel wrapped in duct tape. To anyone with eyes, this car was finished, a relic, a lost cause. But Richard Ashford didn't see a car. He saw an opportunity to humiliate someone, to remind the world that money buys superiority, that people like him exist on a different level than people like Sarah Collins. Sarah stood off to the side, arms crossed, her coveralls stained with the evidence of 16-hour workdays, her face calm despite the insult hanging in the air like smoke. She was 38 years old, a mechanic who'd spent the last 15 years proving she belonged in a profession that didn't want her, fixing cars that everyone else declared unfixable, building a reputation one engine at a time in a town that still whispered behind her back. She'd heard men like Richard before. Hell, she'd defeated men like Richard before. But this one was different. This one had money, cameras, and an audience. Because standing next to Richard was his assistant Marcus, early 30s, expensive casual wear, iPhone Pro Max held steady in his hand, live streaming the entire encounter to Richard's 200,000 Instagram followers. The comments were already flooding in. Laughing emojis, fire emojis, people mocking the Datsun, mocking Sarah, placing bets on how badly Richard was about to embarrass her. "That thing?" Richard continued, gesturing at the Datsun with the kind of dismissive wave you'd use to shoo away a fly. "That's what you're gonna race. Lady, I don't know if you're brave or just stupid, but I'll make you a deal. You race me, your little junk heap against my Bugatti, and if you win, I'll give you $500,000 cash. But when you lose, you shut down this garage and admit you don't know what the hell you're doing. Deal?" Marcus zoomed the camera in on Sarah's face, waiting for the reaction. The live chat exploded. "She's gonna get destroyed. Rip her. Career. Bro just ended her." Richard's smirk grew wider. He'd done this before, publicly humiliating people for content, for clout, for the sick thrill of watching someone smaller than him crumble, and he'd never lost. But Sarah didn't crumble. She looked at the Datsun, looked at the Bugatti, looked back at Richard, and then, in a voice so calm it could freeze fire, she said one word: "Deal." Now, before we understand how we got here, before we see what happens when arrogance meets skill, when money meets grit, when a $3 million hypercar faces a rusted Datsun that nobody believed in, we need to go back, not days, but months. Because this story isn't about a race. It's about a car that was left for dead, a woman who refused to give up, and the moment when the world learned that value has nothing to do with price tags. 6 months earlier, Sarah had been contacted by an old man named Frank Martinez. Frank was in his late 70s, a retired mechanic who'd spent 40 years working on Japanese imports back when made in Japan was still a punchline instead of a mark of quality. He'd owned a 1982 Datsun 280ZX since it rolled off the lot, bought it brand new with money saved from years of overtime, drove it every day for 20 years, cherished it like family. But age and illness had caught up with him. His eyesight was failing, his hands shook too much to hold a wrench, and his beloved Datsun, sitting in his garage untouched for over a decade, had deteriorated into what most people would call scrap metal. Frank called Sarah because he'd heard the stories, the truck she'd saved, the fire department ladder truck, the impossible fixes. He didn't have much money, medical bills had drained his savings, but he had one request. "Could you bring my car back to life one more time? I just want to drive it once before I die." Sarah drove out to Frank's house that same afternoon. When she saw the Datsun, her heart sank. It wasn't just neglected, it was ravaged. Rust had eaten through the floor pans. The engine bay was a mess of corroded wiring and seized components. Mice had nested in the air filter box. The fuel tank was full of varnish, so thick you could scrape it with a knife. Every rubber seal was cracked and brittle. The transmission wouldn't shift. The brakes were locked solid. By every professional standard, this car should go straight to the crusher. But Sarah saw something else. She saw Frank's eyes, watery, hopeful, desperate. She saw the old photos on his garage wall, Frank and his late wife smiling next to that Datsun when it was new, when life was full of promise. She saw what the car meant, not as metal and wiring, but as memory, as love, as the last thread connecting Frank to a time when he wasn't sick, wasn't alone, wasn't waiting to die. Sarah told Frank she'd try. No guarantees, no promises, just effort. Frank cried, actually cried, and hugged her with trembling arms. Sarah loaded the Datsun onto a flatbed and brought it back to her garage. For the next 5 months, in the hours between paying jobs, late into the night when the world was quiet and only the sound of her tools broke the silence, Sarah worked on that car. She stripped it down to the bare chassis, cut out every piece of rusted metal and welded in new panels she fabricated by hand, rebuilt the entire suspension with modern components that improved handling without betraying the car's original character, pulled the engine, an L28 inline-6 that hadn't run in over a decade, and performed a complete overhaul, bored the cylinders, replaced pistons and rings, rebuilt the cylinder head with upgraded valves and springs, installed a performance camshaft, added a turbocharger kit designed for the L-series engine, fabricating custom exhaust manifolds because off-the-shelf parts didn't fit right, built a custom intercooler, tuned the fuel injection system with a standalone ECU she programmed herself, spending weeks dialing in the air-fuel ratios, the ignition, timing the boost curves. She rebuilt the transmission with upgraded synchros and a limited slip differential, overhauled the braking system with modern disc brakes at all 4 corners, rewired the entire car from scratch, labeling every wire, routing everything with precision, making sure it would be reliable and safe, restored the interior, reupholstered the seats, replaced the dashboard, installed a period-correct stereo system that Frank would recognize, painted the exterior in the original factory color, a deep metallic blue that shimmered under the lights. Every bolt, every nut, every detail was done with the kind of care that only comes from love. Not Sarah's love for the car, but her love for what it meant to Frank. When she was done, the Datsun wasn't just restored, it was reborn. Under the hood sat an engine making over 400 horsepower, more than double the original output. The suspension handled like a modern sports car. The brakes could stop on a dime, and the whole package weighed just 2,600 pounds, making it a power-to-weight monster that could embarrass cars costing 10 times as much. Sarah called Frank and told him to come see his car. When he arrived and saw it, gleaming, perfect, alive, he broke down completely. He sat in the driver's seat, hands on the steering wheel, tears streaming down his face, and whispered, "Thank you." Sarah handed him the keys, told him it was his, no charge beyond parts cost, which she'd subsidized heavily because she knew he couldn't afford market rates. Frank drove that car every day for 3 weeks, the biggest smile on his face anyone had seen in years. And then Richard Ashford saw a video of the Datsun. Someone had filmed Frank driving it through town, posted it online with the caption, "Old man gets his dream car back thanks to local mechanic." The video went mildly viral, 500,000 views, lots of wholesome comments. But Richard saw opportunity. He commented publicly, "Cool story, but that car's still junk compared to real performance. My Bugatti would destroy it without breaking a sweat." The comment got attention. People started tagging Sarah, asking if she'd respond, asking if she'd race him. Sarah ignored it at first. She didn't have time for ego contests. But then Richard showed up at her garage, cameras rolling, making his offer public. $500,000 if she won. Her garage shut down if she lost. The stakes were designed to be impossible to refuse, and that's how we got here. Sarah standing in her parking lot, Richard smirking at his Bugatti, 200,000 people watching live, waiting to see what would happen next. Sarah looked at Richard and asked one simple question: when and where? Richard's smirk widened. Tomorrow, midnight, the old airstrip outside of town. Quarter-mile drag race, winner takes all. Sarah nodded. I'll be there. Marcus's camera caught Richard's laugh as he climbed into his Bugatti and drove off. The engine's roar a statement of superiority. The live stream ended. With over 300,000 viewers, the clip already being shared across platforms, headlines forming: Millionaire challenges, small-town mechanic to impossible race. The betting odds heavily favored Richard. Why wouldn't they? His car cost $3 million, had 1,500 horsepower, was built by one of the most prestigious manufacturers in the world. Sarah's car cost maybe $50,000 in parts and labor, was nearly 45 years old, was built in a garage by one woman with used tools and borrowed equipment. But numbers don't tell the whole story. Sarah spent that night doing something Richard would never think to do. She listened to her car. She took the Datsun out to an empty road and ran test passes, fine-tuning the suspension settings, adjusting the tire pressures, tweaking the boost levels, dialing in the launch control. She didn't have traction control or launch assist or any of the electronic aids that came standard in the Bugatti. She had skill. She had knowledge. She had the kind of relationship with machinery that only comes from spending your life under hoods, learning to feel what an engine needs, understanding that performance isn't just about horsepower, it's about weight distribution, traction management, driver input, the 1,000 tiny variables that separate winning from losing. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching this from? Are you in the States? Somewhere else in the world? Drop a comment and let me know your city or country. I love seeing how far these stories reach, how many people connect with the idea that underdogs can win, that skill beats money, that broken things are worth saving. So go ahead, drop that comment. And while you're down there, tell me, have you ever been in a situation where someone bet against you, where someone with more resources, more advantages, more arrogance told you that you'd never win? How'd that turn out? Let's build a community of people who refuse to back down. The next night, midnight arrived like a verdict. The old airstrip was packed. Word had spread, social media, local news, the kind of viral momentum that turns a race into an event. Over 2,000 people showed up. Some came to see the Bugatti. Some came to support Sarah. Most came to see a spectacle, to witness either a miracle or a massacre. Portable lights illuminated the quarter-mile strip of cracked asphalt. Richard arrived in his Bugatti, flanked by cameras, his assistant live-streaming to now over 500,000 viewers. He wore a custom racing suit, designer probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and waved to the crowd like a celebrity. Sarah arrived in the Datsun, alone, wearing her usual coveralls. No fanfare, no cameras, just her and the car. They lined up at the starting line. The crowd fell silent. Richard revved his Bugatti, the quad-turbo W16 screaming with a sound that felt like violence, like mechanical fury, like the wrath of gods. Sarah revved her Datsun, the C, turbocharged inline-six spooling with a sharp, purposeful whistle, the exhaust note clean and aggressive but controlled. A volunteer stepped forward with a flashlight, ready to start the race. Richard looked over at Sarah through his window and mouthed one word: "Goodbye." Sarah didn't respond. She just gripped the steering wheel, eyes forward, focused. The flashlight dropped. Both cars launched. The Bugatti's all-wheel drive system hooked perfectly, all four tires biting into the asphalt, the car rocketing forward with the kind of acceleration that defies physics. But the Datsun hooked too. Sarah had set the tire pressure perfectly, had dialed in the boost to build progressively, had timed her clutch release with surgical precision. For the first 50 feet, the Bugatti pulled ahead. Its power and traction were undeniable. But then something happened. The Datsun started closing the gap, inch by inch, foot by foot. The turbo fully spooled, boost climbing to 22 psi, the engine screaming. Toward redline, the car lighter and more nimble than the Bugatti despite having less horsepower. By the halfway mark, they were neck and neck. The crowd erupted. Richard's face, visible through his window, shifted from confidence to confusion to panic. He floored the throttle, the Bugatti giving everything it had. But Sarah had one more trick. She shifted into fourth gear at exactly the right RPM, keeping the engine in its power band, maximizing acceleration. The Datsun surged forward, crossed the finish line half a car length ahead, time 10.8 seconds. The Bugatti, 11.1 seconds. Silence, then chaos. The crowd exploded. People ran onto the strip, swarming the Datsun, cheering, screaming, filming. Sarah sat in the car for a moment, hands still on the wheel, breathing hard, the weight of what just happened sinking in. She'd won. She'd actually won. Richard sat in his Bugatti, frozen, unable to process that his $3 million hypercar had just been beaten by a 45-year-old. Datsun built in a garage. Marcus kept the camera rolling, capturing Richard's stunned face, the live chat absolutely losing its mind. No way. She did it. Underdog of the century. Sarah climbed out of the Datsun, walked over to Richard's car, knocked on his window. He rolled it down slowly, his face pale. "You owe me $500,000, Sarah said calmly. Richard stared at her. Then, to his credit, he nodded. "I'll have it wired Monday morning." "Good," Sarah said. "And one more thing. Don't ever call someone's work junk unless you've done the work yourself. That car you just lost to, I built it with my hands. Every weld, every bolt, every line of code in the ECU. You bought yours. I earned mine. There's a difference." Richard said nothing. Sarah walked back to her Datsun, climbed in and drove off into the night, the crowd parting for her like the Red Sea. The video of the race went viral. 10 million views in 48 hours. National news picked it up. Sports networks analyzed the race. Automotive forums dissected every detail. Sarah's phone rang non-stop. Interview requests, sponsorship offers, people wanting her to build their cars. She declined most of them, took the $500,000 Richard wired, he kept his word, and used half to upgrade her garage, hired 2 more assistants, and donated the other half to a local technical school to create a scholarship fund for young women entering the trades. Frank Martinez, watching from the crowd that night, lived for another 6 months before passing peacefully. But in those final months he drove his Datsun every single day, the car that Sarah had saved, the car that had beaten a Bugatti, the car that proved broken things are never truly broken. They're just waiting for someone who believes they're worth the effort. So what's the lesson here? It's not that Datsuns are better than Bugattis. It's not even about cars. It's about something bigger. The world will always have Richard Ashfords, people with money and arrogance who think their resources make them superior, people who will bet against you, mock your efforts, tell you that what you're building will never measure up. And you have a choice. You can argue, you can get angry, or you can do what Sarah did. Let your work speak. Build something so undeniably good that when the moment comes, when the race starts, when everything is on the line, you win. Not because you're lucky, not because you're reckless, but because you put in the work, because you understood your machine better than anyone thought possible, because you refused to accept someone else's judgment of what you're capable of. And here's the truth they don't tell you. Most of the time, when you go up against someone like Richard, you won't win. The odds are against you, the resources favor them. But sometimes, just sometimes, if you work hard enough, if you believe deeply enough, if you execute perfectly enough, you get your moment. You cross that finish line. First, and when you do, it doesn't just change your life, it changes everyone watching, because they see that it's possible, that underdogs can win, that skill beats money, that a rusted Datsun can beat a Bugatti if the person behind the wheel knows what they're doing. So one last time before we close, where are you watching from? And what's your Datsun? What's the thing you're building that everyone says will never work? Drop it in the comments, because Sarah Collins proved it's possible, and if she can do it, so can you. Let's stop listening to the Richard Ashfords of the world and start proving them wrong. Together. One race, one build, one refusal to quit at a time.